Estes e outros conteúdos estão disponíveis em www.beiratv.pt.
We are both currently studying part-time for a taught master's degree in landscape architecture at Manchester Metropolitan University. We have decided to participate in this European project to test concepts of regeneration embedded in our design treaties in the unfamiliar situation of the damaged landscapes and subsequent desertification in and around Idanha-a-Nova. Although our work is based in an academic context, we hope that its conclusions can contribute to the debate on how to achieve a sustainable future for this region. We originally started our project by looking at the term regeneration and what it means. The dictionary definition can be seen as very generic, so in order to understand how regeneration works within the environment, we must break it down into its separate components. We broke the components down into anthropocentric and biocentric. Anthropocentric regeneration means a purely human action. For example, the regeneration of part of London is to create the London Olympic Park. The main outcome is economical. Whereas biocentric regeneration is that of a natural world, completely separate from human interaction. For example, the regeneration of a natural forest after a forest fire, it is purely biocentric. At this point, the two elements, anthropocentric and biocentric, are separate and lack a relationship. From the analysis of case studies, this lack of a relationship is not always true. A case study we looked at is algal biofuel. To understand the relationship between the human regeneration and natural regeneration, we must break this down into separate components. We first break it down by looking at the human element, humans' thirst for energy. This generally cannot be considered as a regenerative process. The biocentric element is the algae. This regenerates itself through photosynthesis. This new relationship which emerges is not anthropocentric or biocentric. It is a combination of the both. This new relationship is anthro-biocentric. It is driven by anthropocentric systems but utilizing biocentric processes. And this gives us algal biofuel, which is an anthropocentric way of regenerating itself.
Okay, so having found the anthro-biocentric case study, we looked for more case studies which could sort of widen our viewpoint and find any other case studies that would match. So we looked at the city of Chernobyl, which is a purely anthropocentric case study. So at this point, Chernobyl is a completely anthropocentric construct consisting of just anthropocentric activities, but is still surrounded by biocentric activity, but the two are complete separate entities. So after the Chernobyl explosion occurred, there was no anthropocentric activity at all, so the biocentric could take over. And again, this creates a brand new relationship, which is not A or B. It's more of the biocentric and less of the anthropocentric. So this is bio-anthro.
In a Mediterranean climate, there is a delicate relationship between the physical resources of water, soil, microclimate, indigenous vegetation, and the pattern of human activity. Historically, territorialization of the land created a symbiosis between resource exploitation and renewal, which would support a level of productivity combined with sustained economic activity. A combination of social, political, and technological factors in the last 50 years have combined to change this relationship between humans and the land, leading to physical and human desertification and non-renewable exploitation of resources. My project examines one particular problem, the disappearance and replacement of indigenous vegetation with plantation forestry, highlighted here in pink. This is not only a problem related to the physical and visual condition of the landscape, but is also closely intertwined with the economic and social and political issues. In a way, it is a microcosm of the problems of desertification affecting so many Mediterranean countries. To demonstrate my point, I've found a case study which is very relevant, and this is in Saudi Arabia. In 1987, they had one of the largest underground aquifers in the world, 120 cubic miles of underground water. In 1991, they began to extract this water to support agriculture. In 2000, the rate of extraction exceeds the replenishment of the water. In 2012, there was only 24 cubic miles of underground water left. And in 2016, it is predicted that the farming production will be halted through the lack of water. This is a very real issue that could occur in Idanha-a-Nova if the relationship between the anthropocentric plantations and biocentric systems are restored. This would mean creating a new system which allows for economic productivity whilst improving the biocentric systems. This would create a new anthro-biocentric system. The design proposal which I am developing is not to create the landscape of the past, but to introduce measures of adaptability, resilience, fluidity, and multiple timescales in the relationship between vegetation and human activity. This will be achieved through the restructuring of existing vegetation and the introduction of new vegetation systems. These will provide a range of economic resources to stimulate a re-urbanization of the landscape, creating new spatial and temporal patterns of inhabitation in which human activity is in a positive ecological relationship with the landscape. This new relationship with the plantation will a creation of a complex ecosystem which will increase biodiversity. A biodiverse ecosystem helps stabilize the water table and decreases soil erosion. A biodiverse system strengthens a delicate ecological balance. A biodiverse system provides many harvestable points. A biodiverse system increases employment diversity.
Okay, my project examines the spatial relationships between the parishes in Idanha-a-Nova itself and looks to find the voids where we can deploy regeneration. In a landscape which has suffered human and physical desertification in the last 50 years, the way in which alternative scenarios can be staged relies on a realignment of thinking that questions existing programs and relationships. The way in which we alternate scenarios can be staged relies upon a realignment of thinking that questions existing programs and relationships. So, for instance, at the moment, the current failing systems happen to be topography and the heavily reliant upon private transport to get around the municipality. And there's also fantastic amounts of local produce, but a lack of knowledge to globally trade this produce that's being made. And we also need to create some pull factors for the younger population to come back to Idanha-a-Nova instead of fleeing to the coast. So this is the framework in which, how I plan to do this. My approach uses data mapping as a tool which will form a vehicle for regeneration to materialize within. The approach is based on challenging familiar physical, cultural, and economic frameworks by remapping these representations in different combinations and contexts. So for instance, on this slide you can see one of the boards that I have included from my exhibition, and this is just an idea to try and illustrate how these voids will appear. So for instance, I've mapped the transport network, amenity abundance, and the population density. And from this, when they are overlaid, we'll find out where the voids appear and where there's concentrations of, for instance, amenities and good transport links. Responsive regeneration. Through this process, I hope to identify spaces of emptiness in which I can assign new programs. And these would act as the catalyst to generate new systems of connectivity in the landscape, and which will transcend existing broken relationships and reposition centres of activity and voids in a new dynamic landscape condition. And the way in which I'll do this, I'll use two forms of regeneration, one which is an emergency form of regeneration, and one which is more of a continuous process of regeneration. And here is a local case study to illustrate how this could be carried out. The Boom Festival is in Idanha-a-Nova, and it's a flexible festival which pops up and down and happens every 2 years. The festival is beneficial for the economy and increases the population fivefold to 15,000 people, and has an emphasis on sustainable elements. And this is just one example of how this continuous dynamic regeneration could be achieved. Thank you for listening.